The second source I wanted to discuss is a document dated to the late 3rd century BC, which is a set of regulations of how an individual identified him or herself on a contract. In a nutshell, the person must state their name, their father's name, and their ancestral place of origin. Some more factors to that, but trying to be succinct here. So now that I have superficially set the stage, I will give you two perspectives on how the Egyptians were systematically discriminated against. The first is by the modern historian Naphtali Lewis. Lewis argues that the distinguishing factor between Greeks and Egyptians was blood. So long as an individual had one Greek ancestor, even if he or she was not a citizen, spoke the language, or had a Greek name, he or she was still a Greek. Lewis's argument relies on the premise that Greeks and Egyptians could make these distinctions, no matter how assimilated both groups became to one another. Furthermore, Lewis gives evidence of both ethnic groups constantly seeking opportunities to make the other's life miserable. The other modern scholar, Roger Bagnall, takes a different approach to reach the same conclusion as Lewis. Bagnall suggests that the Greeks lacked a modern conception of racism based on the color of one's skin. Rather, what made someone Greek was their education, employment, and status. Bagnall argues that it was common for an Egyptian to become a Hellen. Bagnall's model neglects the emphasis of Greek names, ancestry, and place of origin. Furthermore, the centers of Greek education was a gymnasium in the polis, and the only individuals allowed access to these institutions were citizens. In the most basic form I can put it, Bagnall's argument is catch-22. In order to be a Greek, one needs to have a Greek education, but the only way to get that education was to be a Greek citizen in the first place. So, although both scholars agree that there were barriers preventing Egyptians from penetrating the position of subordination into the realm of privilege that was exclusively reserved for the Greek overlords, Lewis believes privilege was afforded to anyone who can claim Greek ancestry, while Bagnall argues that it was afforded only to those who successfully assimilated into Hellenic culture. A combination of both scholars would have been more appropriate. It makes sense that children of a Greek parent would have the opportunity to learn the language. This situation combines Lewis's bloodline argument with Bagnall's education theory. So I'm going to sum up this panel with my opinions. I'll remind you that the main question is, did racism limit Egyptians' opportunities in public life? And that my answer is, no. Ptolemaic society was one that provided equal opportunity for all based on merit rather than a society that propagated racial discrimination. Yes or no answer, right? So first but not compelling enough to support my case on its own, is that evidence exists of Egyptians obtaining high military command, high status administrative positions, and as influential advisors in the king's court. The nature of the extreme assimilation I attempted to present to you has been a major catalyst for Egyptian participation in the Korah, especially in the later part of the dynasty. I admit that there was racial discrimination in the 3 Greek polis in Egypt, but I believe those small isolated areas are not sufficient to represent the entirety of the country. The Ptolemies did not actively try to alienate the Egyptians. They maintained the same administrative structures that had long been established in Egypt, maintained the confidence of the people in the court systems, and something that was not touched upon in my panel was that the Ptolemies supported the powerful Egyptian priesthood. Now, my professor marked my essay, and if he was correct, then I still have not convinced you that I'm right, for the simple fact that if the Ptolemaic administration really was an equal opportunity one, it would have operated in both the Greek and Egyptian languages. He gave me the example if, for instance, the Canadian government or military refused to operate in French as well as English. Could French Canadians claim that there was racial or ethnic discrimination in public life, even if there was no rule banning French speakers from the army or government? A compelling question indeed. Well, it would not be fair to take into account Quebec's strong defense against assimilation, which was not a factor in my research. I wouldn't consider my professor's example to be systemic racial discrimination because, although more difficult for some, Egyptians did have the opportunities to intermarry with Greeks and their children could learn the language. But this would be the same situation for Greeks in the Korah who were born in Egypt and had to learn 2 languages if they wanted to participate in their neighborhood and in the administration. So, if my professor uses a modern example to relate his point to, I would like to as well. There may be equal opportunity for all Canadian citizens to enter our administration, but then why do we find predominantly white males running for political office? That is because there are certain advantages existing in society that favor one group or the other, although we agree that it is not racially exclusionary. Thank you.
All right, so you get to speak first. How do you feel, Gibrian?
I feel I don't do my essay justice by talking about this. There's not enough sources that I bring into my panel. I think I spent a lot of time on background information, but I kind of want to keep it because I figure not everybody, even though this is a history panel, not everybody has studied the same area that I have. So if you guys learn a lot about Ptolemaic history and about Greek history in like the most previous form possible, then I did a good job here. In terms of my arguments, they are extremely complex, and there's a lot of examples I have used, and a lot of things I couldn't even touch upon, about incentives of Egyptians trying to assimilate into Greek culture, which French Canadians don't really want to do in Canadian culture, so I don't think that my professor's analogy really applies. But I try my best to argue my point in the briefest way I possibly can. If you guys are convinced with what I had to say, then I did my job. And for the record, I'm arguing against the status quo. A lot of people believe that there was racial discrimination, and hey, I like arguing against them. It's just kind of more interesting now. So.
Okay, feedback from your peers. Oh.
We learned something.
Feedback is a good thing. Feedback is a good thing. Okay. That's good. Take your pick.
Okay, we'll just go in counterclockwise.
I don't know how the panel's going to work, but if you say don't include so much background information and you have all your points, can you just, and if they ask you a question, well, what about this, can you then not provide background information? Or
Yeah,
I don't
you
know.
could do it that way.
You could, I'm not sure if that.
Yeah, I think it would be easier to provide background information than have people like ask me about specific examples. So yeah, that'd be a better strategy. Nice for you guys.
What do you think, folks? Was there too much setup this year?
I think I'm in this class, in this Ptolemaic teacher class, and even I'm in that class learning it. You need background information.
Yeah.
Even I was like, okay, you still need background information. I think I like that part of it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Was it easy to follow? Because I just gave a lot of one-liners that like encompassed a lot of history
Sure.
in each of those.
What do you think, folks?
I think we can scale down the background information a bit and then expand on your points a bit. I timed it was 15 minutes exactly in case you want.
Yeah, it is.
Great. Yeah.
That is great. So that gives you some room if you want to add a few more paragraphs to back up your arguments, your discussion about your arguments, then you have that time.
So do you guys think I should leave out the point about the Peloponnesian War and like Athens against the Persians and that lead up? Yeah, that's not necessary. Okay.
Was it helpful?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, that whole thing, but I guess you could scale that back a bit. But,
Okay.
it helped me follow it, because I didn't know the history of it, so
Yeah.
it was interesting to learn it. Yeah.
I'm gonna go with Henry's.
I think if you can add some picture or a short clip video thing, just let people know more information, that would be good. Because if you just keep in talking, like reading from a paper, like as an audience, we probably can only understand half of the information because that's the past, right? Like no one living that age. So like if you just briefly just talking,